Love is not a choice, it's a commandment. Jesus said, I'm not giving you a recommendation, I'm not making a suggestion, I'm giving you a commandment. Love one another. How are we to love one another? The same way that Jesus loved us. That is an unselfish, self-giving, seeking first the good of others. Jesus said, if you will have that kind of love, the whole world will sit up and take notice, because they don't see it. They don't see it anywhere. What they see is selfishness, self-seeking, grabbing. You can revolutionize a whole situation by demonstrating the love of God. But bear in mind, it's not an option, it's not a recommendation, it's not a suggestion, it is a commandment. That's right. And so if we don't do it, what are we? In one simple word, we're disobedient. That's right. So we have two options. We can either love one another the way Jesus loved us and be obedient, or we can fail to love one another and be disobedient. But remember, this is not a suggestion. It's not a recommendation. Jesus said very clearly and precisely, it is a commandment. But God has given me a supernatural concern for orphans, widows, the poor, and the oppressed. I mean, by the grace and mercy of God, I'm the head of a family of 12 adopted children. So it's not that I've never done anything for them, but I have seen with a new intensity. I don't want to preach Sunday night's message tonight, this morning, but I've seen that's what God is looking for. We can talk as much as we like about faith and righteousness, but if we do nothing for the people who really need us, we're just using empty words. And there's no shortage of people who need us. That's one thing we cannot complain about. They're not far from any of you. There are people who desperately need to be loved. They're lonely. They're not cared for. They have no answers. They're desperate. And you don't have to walk far from where you live to find people like that. I'll talk to you. If God wills and we live, I'll talk to you on Sunday night about that. But I've come to see that this is the, what would I say? It's the purpose of God. It's what God is waiting for. I was preaching, even before I had this experience, I was preaching in the state of Virginia to a group of black brothers. And at the end of the message, a young black man came up to me and he said, Brother Prince, would you pray for me? I said, what do you want? He said, that I may speak to people with the same compassion that you have. I looked at him for a moment. I said, there's a price to pay. Because I knew I was paying the price. He was silent for a few minutes. Then he said, I want it anyhow. And I prayed for him. I don't doubt that God's hand is on that young man's life. I want it anyhow, no matter what it costs. Do you feel that way this morning? There's this fountain that God sovereignly will open up in you. It's not under your control. You don't decide when it will happen. You see, there are some things that don't come without suffering. I've always been amazed at Paul's prayer in Philippians chapter 3, that I may know him, Jesus. That's wonderful. We all say that. And the power of his resurrection. Well, we all say that. But the next verse, and the fellowship of his sufferings. And many, many times I said to the Lord, as I read that verse, Lord, I don't know that I can really say that. Do I really want to know the fellowship of your suffering? I'm an honest person. I think that's perhaps one of the basic benefits of God's dealing with me. I am honest to myself. I'm honest to others. I said, Lord, many times I'm really not sure I can say that I want to know the fellowship of your sufferings. And the Lord is very patient with me. He didn't pressure me. But you see, I've come to see that some things only come by suffering. Suffering does something that nothing else will do. It prepares the soil for that fountain. Then you see, I realize that things come that way that cannot come any other way. I've said for many years, God is a self-revealing God. He loves to reveal himself. He loves to share himself. But I've realized lately, through what I've been through, that God has a deeper desire than that. He wants us to share what he goes through, to share his experiences with him. And when you go through the valley, you're sharing something very precious, very wonderful. You'll come closer to the Lord than you've ever been. And that's what God wants. He's not interested in us suffering, but he's interested in sharing his sufferings with us. I'm not talking about the sufferings of Jesus on the cross. Those were unique. Only he could do that. But I'm talking about the sufferings of Jesus for the church. Don't you think that Jesus is grieved sometimes by the way the church acts and behaves? We can be critical, we can accuse, we can point, and believe me, nobody could do that more effectively than I can. But that's not what God is waiting for. He's waiting, will you share my deep concern for my bride, for the one I love so much? Can I share some of my sufferings with you? That's really when you're getting into deep water at that point.